It's time to turn down the noise and tune in to News You Can Use, the show that gives you a quick insight into the latest twists and turns in healthcare news, where every diagnosis comes with an order of side-splitting humor. Your hosts are Dr. Nick, a longtime host, innovator, and healthcare wizard who can prescribe a digital dose of innovation to cure even the most ailing operational inefficiencies. And Dr. Craig Joseph, the healthcare guru who can diagnose both patient and software glitches with equal precision, making sure hospitals run smoother than a well-oiled robot doc. So buckle up, because we're diving into the ER of excitement, the ICU of irrationality, and the waiting room of wacky wisdom. Now here's Dr. Nick and Dr. Craig.
Welcome, I'm Dr. Nick.
And I'm Dr. Craig.
This week, we will be dissecting the latest healthcare news, unraveling the twists and turns, and making sense of the debacles.
Just remember, life's a lot like a breaking news story. Unpredictable, often absurd, and occasionally leaves you wondering if it's all just a cosmic prank.
This week, we take a look at rings and pediatric patients.
And we dive into Chevron and generative AI.
First off this week, let's have a look at CrowdStrike and cybersecurity. So, CrowdStrike. Had you heard of that company by the time?
I had.
Let's say 7 days ago.
I did. I had heard of CrowdStrike. Some of the work I do involves cybersecurity, and so I was aware of their existence. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I was too. It wasn't a completely unknown to me, and certainly an area that I follow, but I think it's now part of the general terminology that people use as a method of cursing at others, perhaps. Are you going to CrowdStrike that?
That's nice. I like that. I feel like that it should become it's a verb now.
New verb, right?
Maybe it'll be an adjective at some point. Yeah, it was a little apparently like a little tiny mistake in some software, and the good news is that from a security standpoint, we want everyone to be up to date. You know, that's one of the major problems, is that someone identifies a hole in a computer code somewhere, and that can be used for by evildoers. And they say, this is the fix. All you got to do is apply this fix. And then a significant chunk of corporate America or the world does not apply the fix in a timely fashion. So we've gotten very smart, Dr. Nick, and we've started just automatically applying some of these updates. And that's the good news. And apparently there's also bad news.
Right. And let's just clarify this for the benefit of everybody listening. In this particular instance, I think the methodology is such that if you have CrowdStrike installed, I don't think you get an option to decline. It's not like the old updates that you get where you can say, oh, no, I'm going to wait. I mean, like me, I'm probably on 2 or 3 versions old of OS X. This is a mandate. It just got pushed out, right?
I believe that is the case. And again, that's not a bug. That's a feature, right? The idea is that, hey, we are going to be constantly updating our software, and we will push those updates to you, and you will automatically have the latest and greatest. That's the pitch to the client. You don't even have to do anything. We'll just update for you.
And I think it happens on a daily basis. I was reading the download, the study of what had gone on, and this is a regular thing. And it was a tiny file. I think it was even a text file, although it had a sys, I think it was a sys suffix. So, but it was actually text. It contained a signature or an expected signature. And what I read was, because it had been malformed or mistyped or whatever, I don't know exactly what the details of how that error occurred. It caused a memory overrun. That was the issue. But unlike a Mac, I'm going to say, the Windows machines don't deal with that terribly well. And it's been a while since I've seen a blue screen of death. Did we see a lot of them.
It's so much so that I saw several articles using BSOD, the abbreviation for blue screen of death. And I thought in mainstream kind of newspapers where you don't normally see that. And one of them actually said BSOD, and then in parentheses it said blue screen. And I'm like, oh, guys, you got it. You forgot the of death part. But yeah, like there was I saw a picture of I think it was a CT scanner with a little,
Yes,
had a
that's
little
right. I did. I saw
screen,
that
had a
one.
little
Yep.
screen above it, which is, apparently has supposed to have the patient name and the study that's being done and how much radiation the patient's getting and where and how and all that stuff. And it was just the blue screen of death. And that's pretty scary.
So here we are with, I would say, one of the leading cybersecurity companies that, its intent is good, although we've seen other instances where they've been duped and, have pushed out things not deliberately, but, there was attempts to influence the content that they're pushing out. In this instance, they pushed it out. There was no nefarious actors. And, that's all part of the design, but it caused just enormous. And I heard this described as the largest, and I know it was only 8.5 million machines, but the widespread impact, which I believe you personally felt. I've got to say I didn't. I live in a totally Mac universe in this household, so I was totally insulated.
Oh, sure. You're disparaging me now. That's fine. That's fine. I am also an Apple fanboy, but yeah, I was supposed to go on a business trip. It was just an overnight trip, and I fly on Delta Airlines, and they canceled one of my flights, and so I was not able to go. And so this was also, though, I mean, we talk about healthcare, obviously, and this affected many healthcare systems, many. Although for a small amount of time, but still, when the electronic health record goes down, and again, just to be clear, everyone that's having trouble, from Delta to any other company, they're all pointing their finger at CrowdStrike mostly, and a little bit at Microsoft, and as well they should, because it wasn't the electronic health record software that failed. It was the servers upon which those things run. And
so how do you protect against this? What is the answer?
Don't push out bad code on a Friday afternoon. That's probably
that was the other date selection. Seriously, on a Friday? Although if it's a daily thing, perhaps that was a total random thing.
All right, so then don't push out bad code. The problem, again, this is the problem we face, right? From a design perspective, it makes complete sense to keep your software up to date. The cyber criminals are always innovating and changing, and so that the defensive software must also constantly be changing and improving. And but I read that 298 of the Fortune 500 companies, so 3/5 of the Fortune 500 companies, run CrowdStrike. And so, which is great if you work at CrowdStrike, or you're a shareholder in CrowdStrike, but not so great for the economy. And so I don't know that there's an easy answer to this. It affects everything, again, from airlines to healthcare systems to everyone that's running a machine. I heard a commentator today say we finally had Y2K. We never had Y2K in the year 2000. we had it this week with all those computers going down at once. Certainly, if there were more competitors, this would just mean there would be a smaller footprint for any one cybersecurity company, and so that might help. I think that we've made great improvements in developing software, in terms of how to kind of program it to be more reliable. However, we can see already that we're moving away from humans creating software to bots and AIs creating software with human kind of overseeing. So I'm not sure if that's good or bad.
I forget where the article was, but I want to say it was a review of the healthcare organizations, and the ones that did the best in terms of dealing with this were the ones that had run scenarios precisely like this for downtime. So if I was to pull anything from a learning standpoint, what can you do? So, to your point, I don't think you can switch off these updates. That doesn't make sense. That goes against the sort of principles of this to protect you on an ongoing basis. And, to your point of the CT, why is it on a CT or MRI? I forget which, doesn't matter. Why is it on that machine? Because those machines are potential targets. You only have to read the story about the attack on a Vegas casino that was started through a goldfish tank and the technology in that goldfish tank. So, jump off points in the network, all of that. So you have to protect all of your endpoints and, more and more endpoints there because we connect everything. But the prep work is to actually go through real downtime, and I don't think that's just a paper exercise. You can't just sort of all sit around and say, okay, we don't have the EMR. What are we going to do? You actually have to run this as a real scenario. And I think I talked about this a few months ago when I was part of the activity in the hospital, and there was a lot of learning opportunities in that. And it was difficult because it was running concurrent with real activity and a busy ER and all the rest of it. But I can only imagine that the value of that, having its muscle memory, is my sense of that. So I think, practice that whole principle and try and sort of establish what could happen. I don't think, I know this wasn't on anybody's bingo card, at least nobody's claiming it so far. So, what they say is that things that haven't happened before happen all the time. And there's one of them.
Yeah.
I forget who says it, but whoever it was, well said. So there's your principles, but from a security standpoint, and we've talked about this at length. Let's just briefly talk about Geisinger's challenge, and this one, it just struck me. It's one of the most difficult areas to sort of focus on from a cybersecurity standpoint. They have essentially accused a former employee of Nuance in this particular instance, who was essentially working behind the scenes, pulling data and then reselling it. He had all sorts of fake IDs, machines to create them and stuff. So it's what they call the insider or the insider threat, the insider job. Just truly shocking. And, I struggle with understanding why people end up going down this pathway, but I have to believe that's not what he intended to do when he started work. Somehow he, could happen to you, right?
Well, it's money. Money's the reason. And
That
typically
can't be the only reason. It can't be.
It's typically the reason. Obviously, I don't know that in this case, but this was a contractor. So not even an employee of the health system, but a contractor. And as I think we all know, every complicated endeavor, company, organization, whatever, has an army of behind the scenes folks that don't work for them, but work on contracts in certain areas and just bring their expertise to this little focal area. And so the risk is there that someone who has to be given security to do all kinds of things uses that power for no good. And it's hard to find them because they are allowed to be there poking around doing things. They're supposed to be. That's what you're paying them, right? How do you police the police, right? It's very hard.
The super level administrators and this gets to sort of nuclear technology and how do you police the Minuteman missiles and 2 people, 2 independents, and it's every James Bond story that we've ever watched or read or whatever. Very super challenging. All right, so moving on, Chevron. Aside from being a gas station, or is it a company? I forget which. Can you explain it?
Yeah. So there was first of all, let's be clear. I'm a physician, not a lawyer, but there's a fine line.
Thank God.
There's a fine line between both of those. I think we all agree in the United States here, at least. But I've been listening to some podcasts and reading up a little bit, and basically, I think 40 years ago, there was a case called Chevron versus someone, and basically it was an argument about who gets to interpret legislation that is passed, laws that are made that are somewhat ambiguous. So the Congress passes a law that says that the Department of Fisheries should be able to ensure that observers make sure that fishing companies aren't overfishing, right? So something kind of, it's really clear to you and me what that means, but then how do we get down to the details? And this term called Chevron deference, which was from this case from, I think, 30 years ago or so, Chevron deference said, well, if it's unclear, but and if a federal agency, it's again under the executive branch, has said we're going to interpret it this way, and if that's a reasonable interpretation, again reasonable based on what the court thinks, then they win. So this case was challenged, in fact, by that fishery example, that there was an interpretation by one of the federal agencies that, in fact, you, fishing company, have to pay for independent observers to be on your boats to make sure that you're following all the rules. And Congress never actually said that. Congress said that there should be observers and they should be under the kind of auspices of the government, but not necessarily government employees. Again, I'm oversimplifying it, but you can imagine. So typically, if we're following the jurisprudence that has been happening in the U.S. for many decades, deference would be given to the federal agency and say, well, that's a reasonable interpretation of an ambiguous law. Congress can't possibly legislate for every single possibility. And courts are required to just say, yes, that's fine. If that's what the Fish and Wildlife Authority says, then that's what happens. Well, the Supreme Court overturned that precedence and said no more to Chevron deference, and said, in fact, if it's unclear, then that's what courts are for. And the courts should make these decisions, not an agency under the auspices of the federal government. And so, yeah, so that's a big win if you own a fishing company, but it throws a wrench into lots of things. So now, if the FDA, now we're going to come to healthcare and talk about how this might affect healthcare. And again, we're talking about something that just happened a month ago. If I think that the FDA made a mistake in approving a certain medication because they misstudied it or misinterpreted a study that a third party had done, I can sue the FDA. Always have been able to sue the FDA, but in the past, my lawsuit would most likely get thrown out because of Chevron deference. In the past, they'd say, well, listen, the FDA is the organization and they made a reasonable interpretation of an ambiguous law. And hence, we're not going to entertain, you're out of here. You can't win. Well, now that's going to go to court and that's not going to get thrown out. And that question is most likely now to be decided not by experts at the FDA, but in fact by a judge. Now, you can have multiple interpretations of it. It's a little scary to me because FDA and DEA and all these other organizations that have three-letter acronyms, surely they make mistakes. No question about that. But they have experts there that really understand the big picture and the fine details. And most judges are lawyers. I think they're all lawyers. Who generally don't have expertise and they're counting on their judgment based on understanding very complicated things from expert witnesses on both sides of the issue. So good or bad, it's going to change a lot of things. And so it's a little bit unnerving when you take kind of a core tenet of how the government's functioned and turn it upside down.
Well, I'm just going to say I have heard counter positions that suggest that, that also opens up the FDA to be able to fight things that, have been ruled against them potentially. But, generically, I've got to say, it feels like a bunch of people that don't have the qualifications or the understanding of the underlying technology, medicine, science, who knows, who went to law school or whatever, are now creating decisions. So it feels like a lot of chaos. So watch this space. We'll certainly be watching this space. Moving on. what about the use of Gen AI focused on creating responses from the doctor? You said you saw this article. This sounded interesting to me. I mean, let me summarize. Essentially, you take Gen AI, and instead of responding to patients' questions, you play some interference before they send the question, do a Q&A with the patient in the interaction to gather all the necessary information so that what you submit to the physician, they can now actually respond with quick answers because they've got all the information, as opposed to the usual exchange. Well, what about this? Did you ask? Blah, blah, blah. I sounds like a great idea, I got to say.
It was eye-opening to me. This is an article that came out this month from Vanderbilt University, and the traditional approach, and by traditional I mean being done in the last year, right? Because we're talking about generative AI. So we're not talking about 30 years. Traditional is like, oh, back in the day. What do you mean? I mean 2023. Back in the day.
When we were young.
When we were young and dumb. 2023, back in the day. So, the idea was, hey, physicians are being overwhelmed with patient questions being sent in through the patient portal. How can we help physicians? Well, let's help physicians. And so, hey, why don't we draft a response and maybe save the physician some time so that they can just look at that and go, yeah, that's a good answer to the question, and hit send, and it goes much faster. The approach at Vanderbilt was the opposite, really. Just like you said, hey, the patient's about to send a message that says, hey, doc, can you prescribe that antibiotic that we used before because I have another bladder infection? Thanks. Right. That message was about to be sent out. And then the AI kind of intercedes. It goes, whoa. Here's some things that might help the doctor respond a little bit better, such as, hey, do you have fever? Do you have back pain? Is there any blood in your urine? What was the name of the antibiotic? Do you remember what it was? Those kinds of things, because often what happens is there's a back and forth. Because you tell me you have a UTI, and then I have to ask you about the symptoms, and then you tell me you've got some symptoms, but it's still unclear. So I ask you another question, and that's going back and forth. And wouldn't it be better if we could try to get most of the answers to the questions right there in the first pass, and then we can determine, very quickly how to deal with this issue? And so it's the first time. It seems like an interesting approach. It's not formatted, so it's not like you go through a list and you pick urinary tract infection, and then it goes, urinary tract infection. Let me ask you these 5 questions. So it really is kind of a unique approach, and just looking at what you typed, and probably at this point not even looking at your history, because that's still a little complicated for the LLM to do. I thought it was neat. But
no, I think that's essentially clever. And what it makes me think is, undiscovered country. We haven't explored all of the potential, and I think that will continue to expand. So a couple of brief items. So on my discovery through physician advisor certification and going through some of the training, I discovered that pediatric care, based on the 2012, this was Medicaid coverage, 51% of neonatal stays for children compared to 26.4 is covered by Medicaid. And it increased over the preceding years, I'm sure continues to, and represents about 59% of all inpatient days for children's hospitals, which is striking because they pay at about 80 cents on the dollar, which I'm just going to say, statement of fact, it was a shocker to me. And I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from the listeners. What are your thoughts? What are your things? But let's finish, if we may, with Apollo 11, which I think 16th of July was the date that it launched. It comes up every year for me. I was a space nut. I was reading Dr. Jane. She is too. She listened or watched the Twitter feed that essentially recreates it. Twitter, I forget what the name of the handle was, 10 tweet, 9 tweet, 3. So, kind of interesting if you could follow it and, as things happened and, all pulled. But my particular memory of this was from The Dish, which is based on a true story, which, was the dish that received the transmissions from the actual walk on the moon, because it was in Australia and the Earth was facing that way. And it starred Sam Neill. And the particular piece that really stood out to me was the preparation that this small town in Australia made for the visit of the American dignitaries. And, they were asked to prep the American National Anthem. And they played the Australian National Anthem, which was God Save the Queen at the time. And then Please Remain Upstanding for the American National Anthem. And what did we hear? Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Absolutely priceless.
Hawaii 5-0.
And I cannot establish the true veracity, but it doesn't matter to me. It was fantastic.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It was truly brilliant. We find ourselves at the end of another episode, exploring healthcare's mysteries before they become your emergencies. Until next time, I'm Dr. Nick.
And I'm Dr. Craig.